How's it going, everyone? Welcome to my video. I hope you all are doing well. Today, we are going to be looking at the fourth and final round of my chess tournament from December 13th. I had the black piece against George Miller, who's rated 1970. So, in case you haven't watched my first three recaps, at this point I'm 3-0. I started with 2 wins against 1500s in rounds 1 and 2, and then a win against about 1750 in round 3. So at this point I'm 3-0, but I do have to face the strongest player in the field, being George Miller. The reason I didn't face him earlier is because he actually did lose round 1, I believe. So he lost round 1, then he won the next 2 games. So he's going to be the strongest player at 2-1. I'm at 3-0, and we are going to square off. I do have the black pieces. This is my third black this tournament. You know, sometimes it happens where you play 4 games, and theoretically you should have 2 whites and 2 blacks, but sometimes you get 3 blacks and 1 white, and that's just life, right? So in this position, my opponent with the white pieces plays g3, and then so I see a move like g3, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't necessarily know what to do. You know, obviously he's going to be playing very provocative. He wants me to, like, take all the center and then kind of do a counterattack and things like that. So I'm just like, okay, well, let's just buckle up. I play d5 and then c6. I decided to go for this setup to kind of, like, try to stymie this bishop, and even if he plays a move like c4, it's not going to be as effective. I could play, like, e6 and transpose into, like, what, a semi-Slav or something like that. So my opponent plays d3. His first several moves he blitzes out, so I go e5. I do decide to get control of the center, but make sure that's kind of stabilized before doing so. My opponent played knight c3, I played knight f6. Here, my opponent played bishop g5, I went h6, because I knew he wasn't going to go bishop h4, because obviously I played g5 and trapped the bishop, because the pawn's on g3. So after h6, my opponent went bishop back to d2. It was interesting that he went to g5 and go back to d2. I assume he's trying to provoke a weakness on h6. I think most people, or I don't know, I think a lot of people have just taken anyway, and then computer saying e4. I mean, I don't know, it does give me the bishop pair. I wouldn't have minded. He goes bishop d2, and it also keeps pieces on the board, so I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, my opponent's playing some like hyper modern stuff with g3, bishop g2, you know, bishop g5, bishop d2, so there's not really any opening theory to like kind of like talk about here. So at this point, I'm just like playing like just natural looking moves, trying not to leave too many weaknesses, and just play a nice game of chess, right? Here, my opponent, or sorry, I went bishop e7. You might be wondering why I played bishop e7 rather than a more active move like d6, d5, or b4. Honestly, I just wanted to be a little bit more conservative. I wanted my bishop to be safe. If I do go bishop c5, there is potential for like a knight a4 attack on my bishop, or even like a3, b4, or something like that. I do think objectively the bishop probably was best on a4, sorry, on c5. If my opponent goes knight a4, then I could just drop back to like d6 or something. Then okay, his knight is kind of like on the side. I could play b5 with tempo, and then you know just kind of live life there, right? So, but I played bishop e7. My opponent played h3. Here I played knight d7. A move looking back, I didn't really need to do. It does block the bishop, which I didn't mind, but at the same time, I don't mind my bishop on e6. Part of the idea, actually, of playing h6 in these structures is to enable bishop e6 without having to worry about any knight g5. Now, I know that's very conceptual here and doesn't apply to this position, but imagine had my opponent played, like, let's just say my opponent didn't do all this. Let's just say he played knight f3, and we can ignore the specific suggestions, but after bishop e6, like, I know I'm hanging your pawns. Let's just say I, you know, go queen c7, random move, and then, you know, do a couple other random moves, maybe like, you know, I don't know, a3, then I go bishop e6. Here, my opponent has an opportunity to go knight g5 to attack my bishop, and either I'm just moving my bishop again awkwardly to lose a tempo, or I am giving up my bishop pair. So oftentimes what black will do is they'll play h6 first anyway, to wow. Then I can play bishop e6, and then knight g5 is obviously stymied. So anyway, after all that, I probably should have played bishop e6. There's literally no reason not to. Computer doesn't, I mean, it's up there, but it really wants me to go d4 for some reason, which is pretty interesting. But, you know, it says, like, castle, b5. It has this variation. It wants me to go d4, which, I mean, makes sense, even though I am theoretically opening up the bishop. The pawn on c6 makes it kind of like, you know, just like, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it says the best move is knight b1, but what if he goes knight e4? Then I can trade, bishop takes, and there's variations where I castle, and I can see some like f5 ideas in the air and things like that. It wants him to go back to g2 and then c5, and then I guess it's just gonna have me play knight c6, bishop e3, maybe f5 if I'm feeling really ambitious, and just kind of just kind of take control of the center, right? So it really wanted me to go d4, but honestly, in a game like this, when my opponent's blitzing out all his moves and I'm playing a higher rate player, I didn't really see a need to force the issue, but sometimes it is a good idea to just kind of like look past that and just be like, okay, what's objectively the best move? So anyway, my opponent played h3, and in this position I played knight d7. My opponent went e4, and this is always a pretty interesting kind of like dilemma. Like when your opponent plays e4, like what do you do? Do you just ignore it? Do you take? Do you push? What exactly do you do there? And now here, my opponent is threatening to win the pawn. So if I just castle or something, then he can take and take on d5. So I don't really want to just give up a pawn for nothing, right? It's saying that after knight takes, bishop takes, there's some knight c5 attacking the bishop, and I guess if the bishop goes back, it's saying I have compensation, but honestly, like, why just give up a pawn in the center for no reason? Another move I considered was knight b6, but honestly, that just, like, I wasn't sure. I didn't really want to deploy my knight to b6 just to protect the pawn. The idea, of course, that takes, I can just take back, and my knight is now protecting the pawn, as well as the queen. It would be unleashing the queen, so I'm very well protected. It just didn't feel right. I mean, again, like, the computer's gonna say, like, everything's okay, but, the other move I could consider is d4. But after d4, knight c to e2, I felt like this is what my opponent wanted. My opponent wants me to lock up the center to where it's easier for him to just play like f4, f5, and just get his kingside attack going. So I knew that my opponent wanted me to play d4, and sometimes in these positions it is best to just lock up the center, but I knew that that's not what I wanted to do, so I actually just took on took on e4, and then after pawn takes, I just castle. So I leave the position a little bit open to where if he tries to like attack me, then maybe he gets punished. Obviously, he's a very strong player, so he's not gonna just sort of like he's not gonna play recklessly or anything like that. But I was like, okay, I'll open up the position. Maybe I have like a knight c5 idea or something like that. Bishop e6, and I'll be doing fine theoretically in this position. So my opponent went knight e2. I went rook e8. Looking back, I'm not sure like what good rook e8 does. Like my idea is to go bishop f8, but that didn't even end up happening in the game. I think the position is so dry that it doesn't really matter like what I do. It's like it's not going to say I made some mistake, but best move is b5 apparently to go b4 or queen c7. But I went rook e8 with the idea to go like bishop f8 and then play like g6. So like my opponent castles. Like I mean again here I play b5, so that kind of contradicts what I kind of set out to do. But like I could have ideas to just go like g6 and then bishop g7 and just kind of like my bishop has a new life on the g7 square. So after castles, I decided, well, why fianchetto this bishop when I can fianchetto my other bishop? So I went b5. Obviously, mostly the way to fianchetto is to push the pawn one square, then put the bishop on b7. But in a position like this, to where there's kind of like space up for grabs, and maybe I can pressure the center, like why not just push it two squares, right? Just push it two squares, and then put the bishop on b2. And it kind of has shades of like a semi-Slav to where you have the pawn on c6, you have the d5 pawn, right? Yeah, you take on c4, you let the bishop out, and then you play b. Oh, my arrows are all off. But you take on c4, allow them to take, then you play b5 and like a6. And so that's kind of what I was going for. My idea was that I want to go a6, bishop e7, and then like c5, and just gain space on the queen side. So that's kind of the type of thing we're going for. So after b5, my opponent played a3. The reason for playing a3 is just to stop b4, at least that's my assumption. And here, I could do several things. I could play a5 to try really force b4 in, but I decided to be a little bit more patient. I played bishop b7. Then, in this position, is where things started to get a little bit interesting when my opponent played g4. So, I mean, my opponent doesn't play g4 without a good reason to, right? And I think there are multiple ideas behind a move like g4. One, which I think is the most obvious, is to just play g5 and just rip open the king, right? So if I just do nothing, then there could be an idea of like playing g5, and after h takes, go bishop takes, and my king is just a little bit more open, and there are sort of those ideas. As you can see here, g5 in and of itself is not necessarily the most effective. So, so you might wonder, like, what's the other idea? The other idea behind G4 is, I think deep down he really just wants to put the knight on G3 and then place it on F5. Even more than he wants to go G5. So again, if I just dilly-dally, we'll make my rook C8 dilly-dally move. He's more likely then to play G5 to go knight G3, and then try to hone in on the F5 square. So I just dilly-dally again, he goes knight F5, between the bishop and the knight, I probably have to go bishop f8. And he just has a nice knight on f5. It's hard for me to kick away because if he just plays like bishop e3 or something like that, I can't really just kick the knight away because now I'm unprotecting h6, so he would just take it. And yeah, it's not great for me. It wouldn't be great, obviously. So I think more because sometimes when your opponent plays a move, you kind of have to see past like what's the obvious looking idea to where like what square are they uncovering or what are they controlling to where they're trying to strengthen that and things like that. And I think it's good here just notice that like it's not necessarily about playing g5, it's about knight g3, knight f5. Now, that was something I realized after the fact. I think in the game, I just saw that g5 was a move he wanted to do and just kind of prevented it with knight h7, which, I mean, it's not a bad move in and of itself, but I would be curious actually to see, like, maybe what a better variation would have been. I haven't really looked at this deeply, but the computer wants me to go either knight f8 or knight c5. Let's just say knight c5. I think that makes the most sense. You're activating the knight, you're pressuring the pawn. My opponent goes knight g3, then I can go knight e6, and if knight f5, I play bishop f8, and I can play knight d4. Okay, yeah, I do see that idea. So I think the idea behind knight c5 or knight f8 is that eventually I'm going to go to the d4 square, where it's going to be able to challenge the knight on f5. So that's a very interesting concept. I'm glad that I looked into that. So and I'll have to like look a little bit deeper to see if that's actually the truth of the position. But anyway, I went knight h7, which like the idea is to go like knight g5, but more importantly for me, I was just like controlling these squares, which again, g5's not really that big of a threat, and maybe I should have like played a little bit less paranoid about it. I'm not exactly sure, but I went knight h7. My opponent went knight g3, so he's kind of like showing his cards, so he really wants to go to the f5 square. And here I ended up playing knight c5, because I did see the idea to eventually go like knight e6 and maybe either go knight f4 or knight d4, depending on the circumstances. My opponent played knight f5, and here I went bishop g5, which the computer is calling a mistake. I think the reason is that, well, it's really hard to say. It says bishop f8's the best move, or knight e6, just kind of like not really regarding for my bishop, which is fair. I mean, it's a good knight against a bad bishop. Or, I'm not saying the bishop's bad, but I have a pawn on e5 on a dark square, and it's not really doing much, which was part of my idea with bishop g5 was to trade off my bad bishop, but I digress. Um, I think that the reason why bishop g5 is not great is because kind of what happened in the game. Well, apparently there's f4, which is crazy. F4, e takes, bishop takes, rook takes, and the knight just kind of like gets to linger. Even if I like trade queens, it's like I don't know, rook d8. He just goes rook f1, and there's just like a lot of pressure. It said rook ff1, which is interesting. Okay, well, try not to read too many computer lines, but after bishop g5, I went queen takes g5, and my queen is kind of misplaced on the g5 square. Like, it doesn't have very much forward movement, and there are opportunities to mess up. And we'll kind of look into these here in a second. So, I play queen takes g5. My opponent played queen f3. And here I played rook a d8, just playing very natural moves. Rook a d1, knight e6. Again, kind of my idea is to go like knight d4 in some positions and just, trade off that knight on f5. And then after knight e2, here I thought I saw an opportunity to like kick away the knight by just going like g6, knight goes to e3 or something, then I can go knight d4. Because I think if I go knight d4 immediately, he just takes it, right? He can take it, I play pawn takes, and then he can win the pawn. It says it's tricky after c5, but basically my signal with knight e2 was that he prevented knight d4, so that I'm like, okay, I'm just going to play g6 first and then put my knight on d4. So I play g6, which allows a move that I simply overlooked. Actually, if you want to pause the video, white to play and win a pawn. The reason g6 is a mistake is because you have to recognize that the knight is pressuring the h6 square, so if the queen moves, the pawn on h6 will be under fire with check. So my opponent plays h4, which will actually award him an exclamation point. And the idea behind h4 is that, yeah, you're just attacking my queen, and my queen cannot protect the pawn. So I'm just like, okay, well, there's only one move here, because I have to move the queen. So I go queen f6, my opponent takes on h6, I play king g7, and even like here, even though it is like pretty good for my opponent, because he did just take a pawn, he's solidifying the pawn on g5 as well, or solidifying, I guess, the knight with the pawn is what I should say. After knight h5, there are opportunities for my opponent to mess up. My opponent played the only move here, or the only move to like really give him this type of advantage, which is knight g4. It's quite simply moving the knight away. The reason why there's a little bit of vulnerability to this position, like let's just say my opponent just like played a move like c3 or something like that, just kind of like, you know, it's not like a nothing move, it does prevent knight d4, but basically dilly-dallies for all that we care. My idea here, what I really want to do is, I do recognize that while my knight on h6, sorry, my opponent's knight on h6 is kind of planted by the pawn, that's really all there is to it. My knight is not really doing much more. And I have this move f6. And the idea behind f6 is that I'm trying to provoke the pawn away from the knight. So if he were to take, I just take on h6. And I'm winning because I'm up a knight, right? So after f6, the other idea, of course, is that I am attacking g5. So if my opponent were to move the knight away, then I could take and then take on g5, and I win my pawn back. Now, he does have this tactic where he can take on e5, and then if rook takes, he takes on d8. And if I take here first, then he takes, and then at the end of all that, he has rook d7 check. So, like, of course he just has that, right? But, you know, these are just computer lines, which is why I guess I was just curious why this was, why knight takes e5 was just screaming to be played by the computer. Although if he wanted to be simpler, probably more practically would have been to just trade and then go knight takes e5. And if I go rook here, he apparently has rook e1, I can take, but then he goes knight d3, and my rook is maybe a little bit trapped. I'm not entirely sure. It is pretty unclear. It gets complicated. But my opponent, to his credit, recognizes that f6 is an idea for me to kind of get back in the game, and then plays this move knight g4, which just simply sidesteps all that. Obviously, f6 is way less effective now because he can just take. So here, I play knight e to f4, and not only my worst, but the next few moves, my position just starts to drift for certain reasons that my opponent didn't really exploit necessarily. My opponent went knight g3, and here I took on g2, which, I mean, if you were to like kind of do the mathematical equation of like what the eval was then versus now, it should be a blunder, but honestly, like, it's really hard to like say like why knight takes g2 is a blunder and like what I should have done. I mean, well, the best move is c5, which I think has some of these same ideas where I'm threatening to take g2 and then take on e4. I think the reason is that after knight takes g2, king takes g2, knight f4, king f3, there's this certain idea that I kind of like overlooked, and I think my opponent also overlooked as well, which is this idea to go like h5 at some point. Well, not here because of my knight, but he's threatening this. So I do see this threat of knight takes e5, and the reason why knight e6 kind of sidesteps it, or so I thought, is if you were to take, then I had knight d4, and I have an attack on the knight. He can go king f2, then I take on c2. I mean, still saying that white is doing very good after like knight d7 and like knight f6, but again, I'm just gasping for air at this point, right? So after knight e6, my opponent correctly played c3. I mean, it's not the absolute best move, but he does prevent me from going to d4. And here, after knight c5, my opponent kind of like, so he missed the whole idea, the whole reason why it's like +3 and like completely winning here is this move, and he can either do it first or trade rooks first. It's basically rook takes, and h5. The idea behind h5 is that if I don't respond to it, like let's say I just play like rook d7 or something, he has this move h6 check, and I mean this is just unpleasant to deal with. If king h7, I believe he can just go like knight f6, king h8, and this is just not fun. This is not fun to play, right? The other idea behind h5, he's constantly threatening h6, so if I take, then he plays knight takes, and if I were to advance with my king, he actually has this very specific variation that's completely winning based on the positioning of my king and rook with knight takes e5. We'll give it a double exclam point, actually. Because the idea is, after knight takes e5, when I take the knight, he has rook h1 check, and my only move is to take the pawn and allow a fork with knight f7 check. So there is kind of a specific variation there. I will say, though, just, you know, in fairness to my opponent, after rook takes, h5 is a hard move to just, like... I mean, it's not necessarily a difficult move, but coming up with all the nuances and things like that, like, he probably would have thought that, like, my rook is coming in, I could take, and then play king g6 or whatever, but, you know, it does turn out that concretely it is a really good move. So, anyway, my opponent played knight f6, which was still very logical. I mean, you're planted, you're attacking the rook and things like that. So here I played rook h8. So after rook h8, my opponent does end up finding h5, but after g takes h5, knight takes h5, my opponent starts to falter just a little bit. Now I will say here, it is completely winning for white, as you can see from the eval. The reason it's winning, though, is so what's the right adjective? It's so cool. We'll just leave it at that. You're gonna see the key move and be like, wow, that's absolutely crazy. So in this position, my opponent's not supposed to recapture on h5 because I get king g6 and I get some counterplay, right? What my opponent needs to do is first he goes knight f5, which is not the super cool move. I mean, it's a good move, but he goes knight f5. Then you might be thinking, so obviously king f8 just runs into mate. I hang on my rook. But you might be thinking, after king g6, I'm starting to take the pawn, then I'd be attacking the knight. Like, what's the big idea here? Well, my opponent here has this move, knight e7 check, once again driving my king out. If king g7, he has, like, knight takes h5, and, you know, I have, like, I'm, you know, not protecting my rook if I were to take the knight. So after king g7, there's knight takes h5, like a tactic there, basically. But after king takes g5, the key move in this position for my opponent to secure the win, knight f to g8. Knight g8 just wins the game for my opponent. The best I would have is something like trading and then just sacking the exchange. The reason knight f to g8 is so effective is because if I just play a move like knight e6, then I'm getting mated. Because the knights, both knights, control all the squares that my king could go to. So my pawn can just go rook g1. And yeah, once again, like the knight controls the square, the pawn controls the square, obviously the king and the rook. So my only move would be king h4, and then my opponent goes, actually there are multiple mates. One being knight f5 check, and then checkmate. The other I just realized is he could go rook h1 check, and then rook b to g1, and that's checkmate. So once again, we'll do a little replay. Instead of knight takes h5, he could have gone knight f5, knight e7, and knight f to g8. And he's threatening rook g1 with checkmate. So that said, my opponent did not do that. And my opponent played the more natural-looking knight takes h5. I'm able to go king g6, and there's no goofy, like, knight e7, knight g8, or anything like that. So after king g6, I'm threatening the pawn. I mean, I'm attacking it. It would be a very dangerous pawn to take because there would be, like, some checks and things like that. But I'm looking at this during the game, and I'm like, I think I have life here. And my opponent plays king g4, which kind of messes up. We'll give it a question mark. I don't think it's necessarily a blunder. I think I messed up earlier. It's like I've said earlier, like two mistakes that compound into one. Or no, two mistakes that just compound, like not really into one necessarily. But here, I missed my opportunity. All I need to do is go bishop c8 check. I went knight d3, which is losing. The reason I didn't go bishop c8 check, well, let's start. The reason why it's good is because I would be driving the king away from the pawn. So if the king were to just move, then I could just do something like just trade and then just actually just take here. Actually, that's the more important thing. It's not about the pawn, it's about this exchange, right? Or the two knights for the rook would be winning. I could just take, and then knight takes, king takes, and uh, I mean, computer says it's a draw. I mean, I think like anyone could probably win here. I might have some ideas to attack the pawn and get solidified. My opponent might also have ideas to just kind of like penetrate and attack. So says it's equal, most likely equal, but after bishop c8, if my opponent had gone king h4, this is what I was kind of like worried about, and I didn't really see like I saw this move, which is rook takes h5, sacking the rook, and then playing rook h8, attacking the knight. I just thought there was just some like rook d6 nonsense or something, but as it turns out, I can go bishop e6. Then I can take the knight next. And not only that, but there'll be ideas of like, like taking on e4, I could check and things like that. So after king g4, I knew bishop c8 was like a move. Like I obviously saw the move, like you do a retreating move, but you're attacking the king and you're like threatening all sorts of stuff. But I just thought that like knight d3 was like more effective because I saw this and I also saw this. The move that my opponent played that I missed is this move f4, which is actually a really good move. You're threatening f5 checkmate and forcing me to take, and yeah, we just trade pieces. And again, I'm trying to like ask for air here. I play bishop c8 a little bit too late, just trying to get like rook h4, just get some coordination there. But my opponent just trades and goes rook f2, preventing me from doing anything on the 7th rank. I do go back to the H file, and I start to get into time pressure here. Um, this is kind of where I realize, like, yeah, I'm gonna lose because the king is heading into d6 and is gonna like attack the pawn, attack the bishop, and everything like that. And I got in time trouble, so I didn't really like get all the moves down in the end, but I ended up losing. I was trying to reconstruct the tactic. Somehow my rook was here, and he was able to play like a knight check and then like rook h2 or something like that and win my rook, but neither here nor there. We can see this position is winning for white. It says that g6 is the move, which he didn't do, but we can all see, like, the king is coming in, his knight's active, my king's stranded, the rook, and it's just not a great position. So, with that said, after a few mistakes, I ended up losing the game and finished the tournament on 3 out of 4, so still a very respectable result. I finished on 3 out of 4 and gained, I think 19 rating points, if my math is correct, going from 1761 to 1780. And yeah, I thought that was like a pretty good result, all things considered. I do think, though, that I was like obviously very rusty at some certain moments. Obviously, game 1, I was worse until, he made a blunder. Then game 3, I was also worse at some certain points, but it just kind of came back. And then here, it just kind of like all kind of like came together. I thought it was a pretty good game, all things considered, but I was clearly on the backseat in this game, and so there's definitely gonna be some stuff I need to work on. Maybe more like positionally, I might need to like kind of like delve a little bit more into that, as well as making sure my tactics are fresh. So I'll keep you all posted for the next tournament. I think I have a couple coming up in January. So in the meantime, we're gonna try to get some like chess content out there, maybe some top level games, maybe more like instructional stuff. I'm trying to work on what to do more consistently chess wise, because I do want to grow this channel and just try to just spread chess to as many people as we can. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed the video, please feel free to smash that subscribe button. I'd greatly appreciate it. And with that said, I will see you for the next video. Stay safe, have a Merry Christmas, and peace out.